Good evening, everyone. I'm glad and hopeful that you all have been enjoying the series. So much content has been offered by our respective resident, both local and global experts on these different topics. Each session has been really rich with information to really help us all think about how we're going to sustain this work. This work doesn't get done by doing it alone. This work gets done by doing it collectively, but more importantly, we are in a time and place and continuum of transformation in ways that requires us to talk and to connect with each other and talk out loud about how we see the movement happening forward, because it's really a movement happens with many people going in the same direction, but you've got to have dialogue and you've got to have discussion about what you're thinking and what and really trying to emerge what those best practices are. And I really appreciate that each of the panelists who have participated in this series have really brought their A game. And I'm really excited because we've got another great threesome here with us tonight to really talk about this some more and in some depth, and especially about the personal action. It's so important about what we can do individually, but then how does that again connect to the collective? So tonight with us, we have Tarah, who is going to be queuing us up for starters to really give us her perspective around what does personal action look like, what are some things that are critical, and what are some best practices that she's learned along the way, knowing that this is really a new and emerging journey for all of us. So Tarah, the floor is yours.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Like she said, my name is Tarah. I'm an undergraduate student, but aside from doing that, I do a lot of activism both on campus and in the greater Madison community. I am not from Madison, so I kind of came here not really knowing anything about any of the activism going. I got involved very slowly at first when I first moved here in the spring of my sophomore year. I was part of a group on campus that worked with Girl Up from the United Nations. And so I did some advocacy work around like gender-based violence against girls and things like that. And I met a lot of people in the activism circles within Madison. And then what happened in May kind of just threw me in, and I haven't fully resurfaced yet. Just added more depth doing a bunch of stuff on campus. So when we're looking at like what sort of personal actions that you can do in terms of like related to social justice and like how do you continue to grow, that's been something that I've really struggled with, because, you know, for a long time I felt like I was so stagnant. I had no movement. I wasn't meeting the right people. And sometimes it just takes really like putting yourself out there to get involved in some of these like circles that do what you would like to be doing. So I do a lot of street med work. I do a lot of work around speaking at like common council meetings and educating my peers about like why they should or shouldn't support certain things if they have similar opinions of me. If they don't have similar opinions, I try to have a lot of conversations about like, well, this is why I view things the way that I do. This is why I do the work that I do. And really like that's part of your personal action, is how can you have conversations with people and start telling them these things and getting them to either see eye to eye to you or at least see a different perspective to a situation. And for me, I think that that's been like the biggest area of my personal growth, is like when I was in high school, my parents and I have very differing political opinions. And so at the time it was a lot of, I'm just going to explode at you and you're going to explode at me, and nothing is going to come of this except we're both going to have even harsher opinions of like the other person's viewpoints. So as I've gotten older and like really been in situations where I've like had to learn how to like de-escalate situations or how to have conversations with people that like have differing opinions of me in very high stakes situations, it's kind of taught me, you know, like how to ground myself in those moments and how to really like think about what my next words are and like what my intention with the words are. So when we're talking about like what I would caution people around, because that is one of the questions on here, was like, what or how would you caution us around personal action? And again, I said this at the beginning, but it wasn't on the Facebook Live. To any of my friends or anybody that knows me, this is going to sound so hypocritical. But you have to learn what your limits are. And in terms of growth, that's also something that you need to like grow into and learn. I struggle with this a lot in terms of like understanding when I should stop, when I could stop, what would be best for me, because people tell me this all the time, and I tell myself this, I just don't always practice it, is that you can't help your community if you're not helping yourself, because you have to remember that you are part of your community. And if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you expect to properly take care of those around you? And when you're thinking about personal action and everything, a lot of the work that I do around social justice is just making sure that people feel okay, that they feel safe, that they feel welcome in a space, making sure that like the things that I support in terms of like legislation, the things that I speak out against are things that are for the betterment of people. Often it's minorities or other people of color. And so really thinking about like, how do I limit myself so I don't burn myself out, so that I can continue being like a person that like people can come to about this stuff. Because I remember back in May when things were really going off in Madison, it got to the point where it was like I'd be out until 2, 3 in the morning every night, and I'd come back, I would go to bed, I would wake up, I would try to process through some of what happened, and then I would be right back out there. And it was like every single night I could feel myself getting a little bit more drained. And so really like having those, learning what your personal limits are and setting them, and then having accountability for yourself, whether that means you like talk to others and like tell them like, hey, this is what it looks like when I'm starting to shut down. Can you remind me of what I'm telling you right now? Because I need other people to also help take care of me in these situations and let me know when I'm doing too much for myself. And so I think in terms of like what I've been learning, or what you learn about yourself when you're doing this, is you learn your limits, you learn what's important to you, because as we see right now in the world, there's wildfires and issues with like systemic racism, there's specific instances of like things that involve indigenous peoples, things that involve Black people, things that involve Latinx people. And it's figuring out, I want to help everybody and I want to do that, but what is my capacity? So does it mean that I can go out to marches for all of these people? Does it mean that for certain issues I can only sign petitions and share the information so that other people can become educated and hopefully become like impassioned and do something about it? So really learning like where you identify things, and I don't even think to say like the most important to you, but things that resonate the most with you. So for me, that's always been like issues of racial injustice, because I'm half white and half Asian. I grew up in a mostly white town. And you don't realize the mistreatment that happens to you right away until like you start talking it through with other people. And so that really became like a rallying thing for myself. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I had to say about this stuff. It was just kind of a long rambling where the end goal is basically take care of yourself so that you can take care of your community, know your limits, and really find the things that like impassion you to keep going and keep doing things.
All right. Well, I really appreciate that because, again, there's different spectrums on this. And I know you're out there pretty heavily on doing this work. So I can understand how you're being very cautious about the self-care, and even putting out it's almost like you're putting out to the world and the community like, yeah, I don't actively you're probably going to call me out on this active practice of taking care of self, but it was almost like a call out to say, hey, help me help myself in doing this self-care, right? Because that's the other part of this equation too, that we do have to help each other. And when people understand that, this is not a strength, but you also are very conscious of it, we also can help as allies, right? And saying, hey, I got this. You know what? don't worry about it. I've got this. I can step in, and it's a push and pull. So I get that on that personal action, and I've seen you smile about this before. So we're human. We're perfectly imperfect, and honestly, we all have more work and more practice to do, especially the more passionate we are and the more energy we have around this, especially when it's real life and it's and people's lives are really have been lost and harmed, and there's distress. I know for me personally, I dig in and lean in more many times. And I would say that historically at the detriment of myself. That's not always been the case. So I can totally feel where you're at in thinking about that. So thank you for sharing that perspective. And we're going to loop you back in later on in this conversation when we do the Q&A piece. Before I bring up our next person, which is going to be Matthew Mitnick, I wanted to just let everybody know like what questions we put in front of the panelists to speak to. So we asked them to give ideas that they could share about personal action and its relevance to social justice and racial equity. We also asked them to share with us like what's most critical in this personal action for this movement, and then what would you caution us, right? Because there's so much, you can really be stretched in really different and hard ways. So what do we need to be careful and cautious about in terms of personal action? And then what are you learning? What we wanted to hear from the panelists, like what are they learning as this movement really emerges? What's nice about this panel is that I feel like we're really represented in some really helpful identitied ways. So I think that really hearing from their perspectives about like, what are you learning and what's emerging is really important because this work doesn't stay static. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Matthew. Introduce yourself, let the world know who you are, and then jump in and share with us. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you for having me. So hi, everyone. My name is Matthew, and I'm also an undergraduate student here. And the way I kind of got involved in advocating for all of these things is kind of interesting. So when I was a freshman and I came to Madison, I was immediately interested in like the city government structure and how Madison, unlike a lot of other cities, has so many city committees where people, random citizens, can directly vote on items that impact our lives. And as someone who's studying political science, really interested in public policy, a lot of people are always interested what's happening like at the state level, what's happening at the federal level. When I think honestly, to create the most impactful change, if you get it done locally, you can be a leader for the rest of the state and even the nation. And I think that's when we're talking about movements. I think if you ground it locally and then you build and expand and connect with people from all over the place, you can really grow what you're trying to do. So last year, I was like the press office director for the Associated Students in Madison, and I really honestly like, observed a lot of really concerning things regarding, in some ways, how administration would interact with students, and also even how our elected officials were not always representing people in their concerns. And I didn't really say anything, kept my mouth shut, just tried to do my job. But it got to the point where I saw that when people get into positions of power, it's almost like they become corrupted, where they stray completely from why they wanted to represent people in the first place, why they wanted to advocate for specific reasons, because all they cared about was moving up and advancing at the expense of the people who they were supposed to represent. So that was kind of almost like my call to action, as just as someone who was pretty involved and knew a lot of people politically. I was witnessing firsthand how the system that we are in isn't fundamentally representing the people. And I think this was exacerbated with George Floyd's murder. Although murders from the police is nothing new, this has been happening for so long. I think this was a pivotal point in shaping public opinion, where a lot of people felt, I have to get involved, I have to do something. And it's been really interesting for me to see in that sense, that a lot of people are also at the same time performative activists, in the sense where they'll protest, they'll put something on social media, but then their activism stops there. And when they're in a position to make that change, to advocate for that specific item, it stops. So I ask myself, why is that? And like, I'm very cognizant as well as my identity as a white male who honestly has so many privileges and opportunity that other people don't. So I thought, I need to use the position that I have as a way to rectify, or not rectify, but use the privileges I can to get involved in certain conversations, and to be able to maybe get more heated in a meeting, to bring up concerns people are feeling. So I ran for student council, got on student council, eventually became the chair. And it's been kind of a rough go, if I'm being honest, but because it's tough, the question about, what do I believe is most critical? And I think it's being able to be part of a team, and you can't do something alone. Like, you can't be in a movement alone. You have to have other people with you. And I think when on an elected body that's supposed to represent students, you have to be able to collaborate and negotiate. And that's something I would caution people is, like, I mean, I'll be honest, personally, it's very hard for me to compromise. And if I'm passionate about something, I think something should change, oftentimes I'll just go head on without really realizing that you have to message things differently to different people. And I'll be honest, personally, I want to defund and abolish the police in many ways, but maybe when you're in a conversation or a meeting with a decision maker, you have to message it a certain way so that they'll listen to you. And maybe if that's your long-term goal and you want to get certain things done in the short term, there's ways you can message it to get that across. And that's something that I'm still kind of figuring out. Whenever I'm speaking or the media contacts me, I just tend to state whatever's on my mind, and not always thinking that messaging is a critical part of being involved in a movement. And when you're advocating for like racial equity, social justice, and I think Tara was talking about, it's all about how you use your words. And I think that is really, really important. So I think that at the end of the day is, if you want to have personal action in a movement, as long as you stay true to your beliefs and you don't compromise your values or corrupt yourself over things like power, opportunity, letters of recommendation, which I've seen so many people do, and you stay authentic to your beliefs, I think anything can happen. And right now we're at a point where there is so much public discussion on issues that should have been addressed decades ago, that it is so long overdue. And I think that those of us who are in a position to advocate and are connected with a wide variety of people need to use that collective voice to advocate for all those measures. So yeah, thank you.
All right. I really appreciate that perspective. And again, we all need to be in this together, and identities matter, right? Because the way in which someone can come into a conversation, they just by their very presence can disrupt it. And so I think it is important that we understand place, power, and intersectionality on that, and having an awareness of how that can work when we're trying to make change together. And so I really appreciate your consciousness, Matthew, and really being authentic and thinking about it, and really thinking about ways in which you can leverage it, and also ways in which you also have to be mindful of it, right? Like, so you're constantly having to navigate, like, when is my voice, helpful, and when do I need to, stand by and be ready to sort of step in. And I think that given where you are in terms of, your trajectory, especially when compared to mine, I think it's really exciting, because, I went to the UW myself, and I didn't feel the kind of voice that both you and Tara are expressing is something that I didn't really quite feel that I had. It took me some momentum to really get there. So I really appreciate that you're coming in already like ready to lean in and really disrupt. So I appreciate that you're thinking about that, and it's only going to get better, right? So I really look forward to hearing how that works over time, right? Like, how would you have this conversation again, in a couple years? Like, I would really be marking this moment just to see like what it sounds like, and how would you reflect on it 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So, because I'm sure there'll be some huge growth and understanding in terms of like what's successful and where's the more of the practice and work. So thank you. And again, we're going to be circling back to you a little bit later. We do have some questions coming through. I'd like to next bring up Felicia Pulliam. She was with us last time and has some great perspective, not being from the area, but also and really expressing like what's happening in her community. And I think that that's really important for us here locally, is just to really hear, how is this playing out in other cities and communities, so that we can really understand, like where are some opportunities for best practice, and also just really thinking about that personal action, because it does look different in different communities, right? Depending on that community and how they've been grappling with it. So I'm not going to say anything more, because Felicia is really good at framing and mapping this conversation herself. So Felicia, welcome back. We're glad you're here. Tell us what's been going on and like how you would really lean into this conversation about personal action.
Well, thank you, Annette. Thank you, Annette. I want to start here. I want to start with making sure that we commit ourselves to an education journey. Making sure that we commit ourselves to an education journey. I think it's critically important that we understand the issues, because we can't fix a problem we don't understand. And to know that all of these situations, they don't exist in a vacuum, that these are systemic issues. And so understanding what that intersectionality is, unpacking it. How did we get here so that we can step out of it? Mm-hmm. I know that horrors happen and we jump into activism, and I think people should be on the street. I think that is wonderful, and sustain that level of anger, frustration, voicing that pain is very important. After you bring attention to the situation, you have to be in a position where you can have an accurate, authentic, fact-based conversation about what those issues are. People don't know what's happening. Some people don't understand the history of police brutality and Black folks being murdered by police, our relationship with police. They don't understand that. So they may see, George Floyd, and then they hear about other people. But what's important to understand is that there is a culture to policing, and that there's a practice to policing, and all of that is sustained by policy. So the individual police officer, for sure, is to blame and should be held accountable. But we have to look at the police department, we have to understand what those policies are, and we have to do the work to rewrite policy, and then get people in place, in places of leadership and authority, that will do the things that you've advocated for, that you're working for. So I think it's really important that we take some time to do that work. And it doesn't have to be, these are difficult situations. The history is heavy. It can feel burdensome. It's hard to grapple with. And a lot of times you'll be unlearning some things that you believe to be true. So you have to be prepared for the disruption that will happen in your life and then a tinge of distrust in the systems or the education or things that you've been exposed to, because what you're learning will uncover some things that are true that you don't know about. So I think the education part is really, really important. And back to the system, we need to change the system. So you have to have an idea of what your end game is. What is your end game? What exactly is it do you want to achieve? Now, that's one of the things that doesn't necessarily happen when you jump in the street to protest. Mm-hmm. You don't have a long vision for it. And then we don't have an understanding of how long it's going to take. Ferguson happened in 2014. This is 2020. And we are just at the point where some of these critical issues that that bubble up in the protests and solutions for community have gotten to the point where we can impact policy, dismantle the system. So it takes a long time. We've got the issue of expanding Medicaid. You know, that was one of the calls to action from the Opportunity to Thrive component of the Ferguson Commission report. That part of the report that I co-chaired, it's just now on the ballot. You know, we're talking about youth at the center. We just now have a proposition on the ballot. So this is a critical time for us. This is a really good time for us. Just now have a proposition on the ballot to increase property taxes, specifically to invest in young people, early childhood education and other things that they know that they need, we know that they need, so that they can grow into their full potential. So knowing that it will take time to step through these things is critically important, because you can get dismayed, discouraged, you're going to be tired. So sometimes you're in the street protesting, like Tara was talking about, you know, 2 and 3 o'clock every night, and you're up against this. You're really in a war. This is really a war. And we've seen it played out with tanks and tear gas, right? And it people have died. I think it's important when you're protesting or in any of this work, you've got to show up. You've got to show up. But you need to have a close circle of people whom you trust that are your accountability partners. When you're in that space, you're staying alert, you're there to help others. You have to be prepared for the conflict. You don't want to cause the conflict, but it will likely come. And so you need to be alert and make sure that you're paying attention to where people are so that you can keep them from harm. Because when it gets crazy, it's crazy, right? And I would caution you not to do what I did. Don't do what I did. Don't protest and be on the commission and have a full-time job and, you know, and do that for years and years and then not take a break. Instead, design a fellowship to get more people in the game so that they can do the work. And then don't do that. Take a little break and realize when you're tired that you need to take care of yourself. But sometimes you're just working on adrenaline and hope and determination, and you don't realize actually how exhausted you are. So it's very important to step back for a minute, self-assess, check in, make sure that you're good, check in with your friends, check in with your protest partners, check in with your community, and have those conversations to make sure that people are well. I think that's very, very important.
I'm just sitting here, just taking it all in. And I think what's striking me what's so valuable about your voice and you being with us tonight is because this has been a long journey, right? Like, you know, and we talked about this at the beginning of the series when we started it. You know, when it started in June, it was about how can we have an immediate attention and really try to, you know, rally people and try to get people centered around like where's the opportunity. And I think now where we are is like, you know, this is for the long haul. And so, you know, the change doesn't happen by taking your foot off the gas, right? So I like what you're talking about in terms of check-in and ask about people's wellness, right? Both physical, mental, emotional, right? Structural, like what's their wellness situation going on? And also I liked what you talk about in terms of accountability partners. And you know, so it is really a spectrum, right? And it is teamwork that's going to make this. So it seems to me like one of the personal actions that I'm hearing is really developing a crew, right, of people that, so it's not just you, right, that you are working in tandem with other people. What did that look like for you?
Oh, yeah, I have a family. I have a family. I didn't know any of these people before protests happened in Ferguson. So we've been together for some years. And I know them, I trust them. And if someone has to step out of the work because you have an ill child, or in my mother's case, with her having a stroke, and I have to move and those sorts of things, sometimes you have to step out of the work, but you know that the work's going on, you can keep abreast of it, right? And then you can step right back in. And that is from having built that relationship over time and understanding that we have a vision, we have work to do. So we're still in the consent decree. Just these last two, well, one of them I was out of town, but I've only missed one consent decree hearing where the public is invited to give comment. And I'm not worried about it at all because I know, you know, we get together, what are the things that we want to say, who's going to read this? We got to make sure we get this in the record and script it out. And if someone's not available to do it, then we make sure that that happens, and sharing information, as much information as we can, and sort of keeping, I'm, you know, off of Facebook. So people have to be like, did you know that this? And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you let me know, because no, I didn't know about that. Right. Because that's a terrible place to be.
Right. Well, and not everybody has to be on Facebook, but make sure somebody is, right?
Somebody is.
Or Twitter or whatever else, Snapchat, whatever people are on, make sure that you've got your talented crew, right, monitoring those. A question that came up through the chat that I think would be great for all of our panelists to consider is speaking to tips and strategies for how you talk to people who disagree. And I that is so a center of a lot of what I hear from people is, how do you sit at a, you know, I don't know if we're sitting at tables, but right now, but, you know, how do you have those difficult, complicated conversations? What are some tips and strategies that all of you as panelists can share based on your own experience? So I'd love for all of you to step into that. Felicia, if you want to give a first crack at it, and then Matthew, and then Tarah, that would be great to go in that order.
Well, I want to go back to having a clear, solid, fact-based, research-based understanding and education of the issues yourself. Okay. Because this is new knowledge for folks. They don't know it, right? So you have to do that work and make sure that you build your library, your vocabulary, so that you're ready when people push back, and they're going to push back if they don't agree with you, then you're prepared to direct them to credible resources where they can do the reading themselves, where they can watch the documentary, right? Where they can go to a movie, where those sorts of things. So I think, you know, having a deep well of knowledge, it takes time, but it's really necessary. And the other thing when I first said this to students in my class, these are difficult conversations, and we're using words that are not customarily in our vocabulary. And so I gave them the assignment of going home and looking in the mirror and saying racist. Just say racist, racist, bigotry, misogyny, white supremacy. Practice using the words. The words are not typically in your vocabulary. If you're not having these conversations all the time, sometimes we get tripped up over the words because they're harsh words, right? So now you're getting tripped up over the word and you're not being as effective and impactful as you can be. And so a lot of people haven't used those words. So you certainly can't engage in a conversation when you don't have an appropriate vocabulary.
Matthew, how would you step into it?
I'd say it's really important to, kind of backtracking on campus this year when we were embarking on our activism against the university's police force for a variety of concerns, which again, were nothing new. Many students and members, like in our organization, like student government, for example, claimed, I've never had a bad experience with the university police, therefore there shouldn't be any problems. And something that, we suggested they consider is, have you actually talked with anyone who's had a negative experience? And we have tried doing that. And from my observations, I've noticed that when people actually are able to talk with those who've had different experiences for a variety of different reasons, oftentimes their own perceptions change. And, people need to step back. Like, I'll be honest, as a white person in my community as a child growing up, I never witnessed firsthand poor experiences with the police. And I had to even step out of where I grew up, what my preconceived notions were, and had to really open my eyes to seeing, on that specific issue in particular, that it's a different experience for different people, and you need to talk to those in your community and learn how everybody's being impacted, not just yourself. And you need to kind of like step outside of your box a little bit. And I found that when people do that, I think humans have empathy and compassion. And when they get out of their own like circular box of reasoning, they're able to better understand the vitality of these issues. And that's something we're still trying to do with people. People are so set in their ways. The system does not want to be changed. And even on like so I was appointed last year to the city's like public safety review committee, and it was really eye-opening, the hold that even I think the police have like on the city government structure in and of itself. And it's going to require so much understanding and people to step outside of themselves and realize these things. And I could go on and on, but a quarter of the city's budget goes to the police. I think that's such a big issue that I think everyone can agree with. Why is 1/4 of the city's budget going to law enforcement to essentially, if you look in the history of policing, it's to uphold white supremacy. So I think presenting the facts and showing people that, what you may be experiencing and seeing is not what it's like for everybody.
All right. Tarah, how would you, Tara, sorry. I was on a roll until I fell off again.
You got it, and that's all that matters. So there's a couple of things that I would say. Speaking from my own situations growing up with family that had a lot of differing political views than I do, one thing that was like a reckoning moment for me is like, I always wondered like how I could have these conversations with my grandparents and, not blow up, not basically go to like throw hands. and why when it came to like my dad, where it was like, oh, so now we like fighting, like this is a thing. And I think a lot of that came from me trying to figure out what were my intentions with like trying to change this person's perspective, and like having a conversation that like I knew he would disagree with. And I think it was, for me, it came from realizing that like I believed so strongly in these things, and like that I still strongly believe that like this is how people should be treated, and it should be about, you know, equality and just treating people with kindness and everything. And like that moment when I realized it's because I'm trying to teach him not to basically be a jerk, and like that's where that emotion was coming from, is I wanted so badly to convince him of these things that I didn't think about like what's the emotional tax having this conversation is on me, like as a half white, half Asian woman whose father is white, like what does it mean to like have to relay all of this trauma to somebody who may never understand it. And so really thinking about what is the intention behind what I'm saying. And that's something when you're having disagreements with people, is you think about like that scale that exists that a lot of people use as like basic when you're talking about like how do you teach people to have these conversations. Well, one thing is you need to figure out where that person is on the scale. Are they with your cause? Are they kind of in the middle, don't know where they're going to go, or are they not for it at all? And, you know, thinking about, well, if they're not for it at all and you don't think they're going to change their mind, what is the purpose of having that conversation? And for me, sometimes the purpose of having that conversation is just so that everyone around me, everyone that's hearing me say this, knows that this is not okay behavior. I've had that happen where I've dealt with white supremacists at protests and everything, and there will be people that are just walking by and will hear me like having this conversation with him, and I know he's never going to change his mind, but there could be people that are somewhere on the fence that are walking by, and they maybe just need to hear a differing perspective or something. So really thinking about when you're having these conversations too is, are you trying to change that person's mind? Are you trying to change the minds of those around you? Are you just trying to be right? Like sometimes we have conversations and we all get that way sometimes, where it's just like, I'm right, you're wrong, deal with it. And so like really thinking about that. And another thing is when you're talking to people that like have differing opinions than you, and like you're having these conversations, is you can feel yourself getting angry and you can feel yourself getting angry, and then you just got to like stop and take a breath, like really ground yourself in the moment, and like give yourself a little bit of space to like untense your body and like let that emotion out in a way that's like gonna be constructive, and then take that moment to really think about what you're about to say or why you're about to say it, and like allow that like to just travel through your body and like sink basically to the floor, so that you feel like you have a good footing even if you're sitting. But that's like one of those moments where you take a minute, instead of like solely focusing on what you're about to say, you take a minute to like recognize like, what space am I in, you know, just regrounding yourself in the moment, and then going back to it and like allowing yourself to have the space to just process it before it even comes out of your mouth, whether or not you like realize that's what you're doing. And then the last thing I'll say about like having conversations with people that like disagree with you is, you know, you can't change everybody's opinion, and it's unfortunate that we can't teach people compassion in some ways. And a lot of issues, especially now, is it feels like we have to teach people how to care and why they should care, and understanding that you can't teach somebody that has been one of the most useful things for me is I can present them with the facts. I can talk about my own experiences and my own trauma and hope that it changes their mind, but also realizing that like, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So it's if you give them all that you've got and they still don't change your mind, that's not on you. It's not at your fault. You did a lot, especially when it comes to like BIPOC folks having to like talk about their trauma to get other people to care. It happens a lot in classroom settings specifically, is like people feel the need to just like regurgitate everything that's happened with them in order to validate these things. And you have to think about the like repeat trauma that you go through from talking about it. And then you leave class feeling disheartened because you're like, well, I didn't change that one person's mind. Mm-hmm. You just did so much that you don't even realize. And so always remembering that like, even if you don't change their minds, you still did something. Even if you didn't change their mind, you might've changed somebody else's, or you can like go home knowing like I did what I could do. And maybe someday I mean, this happened to me recently where I received an email from somebody that was talking about like, thank you for always having these conversations with me. I know that I was very frustrating, and I know that these things like that would come up were like very hot topics for you. And I appreciate you always like giving perspective and everything. And like, it's really helped me change my perspective on things. And it's like, that may come 10 years down the line, but like that person could then go on to like have those same conversations. So it's really just like, you did enough, and always like giving yourself credit where credit is due for things.
That's great. I think what I'm pulling together and listening to the three of you is I heard two different sort of dynamics. One is the power dynamic, and the other one is really thinking about your emotional, physical, and intellectual capacity, right? And really centering all three of those, right? Centering your emotional capacity, like where are you emotionally, and what's sort of your intention in the emotion, right? Like, what are you trying to leave behind? I think intellectually, what are you trying to leave behind, and what point are you trying to make? And what are you using to help make that point? And then I think, physically, how are you physically responding to this, right? Because all of that is connected together. And you have, many times when thinking about how you interact with other people, it matters how you're physically presenting, right? Because that's going to determine how people are going to lean in or lean away, right? And so noticing those three aspects of your own demeanor as well as somebody else's can really go a long way to really understanding what the opportunity is, especially on the intellectual piece and emotional piece. Both, all of you touched on that, either with the use of data, right? And really trying to center people with how can you get credible data. I like what you said, Matthew, about really connecting people to people who have experiences, right? Like maybe your experience isn't this, but let's talk about how you could connect with others who have. Don't use yourself as the measure by which things should change. This is a collective society, right? And I really appreciate how you really brought that out, that this is the collective, and that what I really hear from you, Matthew, is really trying to bring the collective together by leveraging your voice. And the other piece that I'll speak to is power. I think understanding that power comes in many dimensions. There's voice, there's your actions, there's your decisions, there's your choices, and there's your relationships. All of those represent power in a certain dimension. So if you don't feel like you have the relationship, for example, to change someone else's mind, perhaps you're bringing other people into the room, or tapping into your friends, as Felicia was talking about, who's your crew, right? Who's your posse that's with you, who might have the relationship to be able to change or influence that person's mind. And I think, Matthew, you were speaking to that too. You might not have the relationship or the experience in this case, right? But you are saying, hey, go talk to someone else, talk to a different relationship who might. And also, again, to choices and decisions, I think people think power is one thing, and it's not. It's nuanced. And so there's many ways to come into how you can strategically change people's minds. And it's through your voice, it's through actions, it's through how decisions get made, it's through choices that are made, and it's through relationships. And so I think really understanding those different dynamics maybe can help people understand that it isn't just one way in which you have to change somebody's mind, right? And I think about, Felicia, especially since this has been, a long haul, a decade, right? Like,
I've been doing this longer than that, but yeah.
Right. But I mean, like, it's really, so it isn't just, like you said, protest partners, right? Which means that, you have people who do that. You have policy partners, right? So there are all these partners that are in this continuum to keep the work going. Mary Beth, I'm just curious how you might want to weigh into this conversation. I know you've been hearing a lot of different points of view. What do you got?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of thoughts. When we made these sessions happen in June, we had thousands of people engage with us. And that was a moment when the whole world was watching what was going on. And I was inspired by those audiences because I was reminded of just how many people there are out there that when their attention is focused on this issue, they want to do the right thing. and they want to figure out ways to contribute. And I think one of the things about our community contributors that is both wonderful and possibly harder to relate to for some of our audiences is that they are all people who have dedicated much of their lives and their work to overt activism and efforts in a selfless, beautiful way. And those types of people are, of course, historically who have borne the burden of the important movements of our time. But I think we also know, as a Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies and a department that looks at social movements, that level of engagement is necessary for things to change, but there also has to be a complementary layer of just a lot of other people slowly changing their minds about things, and the public opinion changing as all of our panelists have talked about today, and people taking the actions that they can in their lives. Even if they're not as specific as protesting in the streets or being a leader on a commission or running for public office or being on student council. So I want to speak for just a moment about building that collective muscle, if you will, that can push a boulder up the mountain if everyone is pushing a little bit. And I think for all of those people out there that just want to do something, that is actually super important. And if you're beginning the journey of engaging in these discussions, or you have any resources or assets at your fingertips, there are certainly lots of things you can do that do matter. So even if you've got $5 to give to an organization where you're like, I don't totally understand these issues yet, but I really feel like this organization in my community is doing the right stuff around it, I want to send them $5. That's an example of a simple asset or resource that somebody has in their back pocket that they can contribute to this overall movement. Similarly, making other small moves like that can be also more action oriented, in the sense of there are always volunteer roles and kind of like baseline entry level things that I think people can get involved with, and just choosing one and trying something on for size that might fit with an organization that you like, talking to a community member who you admire, who might give you a little bit of their time to see if there's any way you can support them. There are lots and lots of baby steps that people can take to get the ball rolling. And this kind of brings me to the similar advice that I give to a lot of the graduate students and undergraduate students that I work with at the center and through the courses that I teach, which is a lot of the people that I work with are brilliant, motivated people at different stages of their lives who come through our programs. And they're really like, what should I do for my next steps once I get done with this program to like make my career as a change agent in these fields that I care about like really happen? And my advice to them is always like, the most important thing is that you take the first step in a direction that you generally think aligns with what you want to see yourself doing and your values. And I guarantee you, if you step onto that, I always talk about lily pads. If you step onto that lily pad, you will learn from that experience. You will try things on for size. You will gain skills, and then your next lily pad will appear. And just having some trust that things have to happen iteratively like that in our journeys, I think is really important, especially in a world as uncertain as the world we're living in now. And great careers and great change agents have been built that way. I'm sure that the first thing that Felicia did as an activist, she was not thinking of the Ferguson Commission as her end game, right? But like, she kept taking the steps forward with what she had and what she could do. And so on that note, the other thing that I also encourage my students to do is to just think about like, what skills do you have? Even if they're like behind the scenes and they're not glamorous. If you know how to make a Canva flyer, or you know how to make a website, or you know how you're not afraid to go door to door and talk to people, think about where you could plug those skills in. And I guarantee you someone will find use for you in that. And I personally have had some of my most rewarding experiences where even if my day job, I was in a leadership role, for my activism, I offered to like leaders of color, like, I'll be your note taker for meetings. I will organize like the Google meetings for this activist thing that you guys are doing. I don't need to be featured in it. My name doesn't need to be on it, whatever, but maybe I can give you some elbow grease towards that. So I just think thinking about those practical things that those of us that, you know, might be juggling a lot in our lives, but want to do something, don't let the false perception that you have to be out in front of the protest or a leader in this movement paralyze you from taking the action that you can take in whatever capacity you're in, whatever networks you have access to, whatever skills you can contribute, whatever small amounts of dollars you can give. I mean, I think the key is take action, whatever action suits what you have to offer and the issues that you care about, and you'll keep learning from there. It should be a part of your annual goal setting, or like just the way you might set goals about diet or exercise or career stuff. Just add this in as another like category, like what am I going to do this year for my action to work on this issue? And maybe it's just and the learning part is part of this too. I don't want to detract from that. So even just following those organizations that have good insight and doing the reading and the learning, like Felicia was talking about, that's part of it too. And the work plan that we're using for these events is a great place to start. Just use that for your planning. And I know Annette will bring us home on that thought.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Beth. I appreciate that. And I do want to echo and amplify what you said about, giving and being active doesn't have to be like the most meatiest opportunity, that it really can be. You might have resources that people have challenges using, accessing, navigating, and for you to just be able to have that at your fingertips and be able to use that is a great offering. And I will tell you that anyone can use that. I've used that myself. The other thing that I've done is I've actually talked to different groups. I've just said, I don't feel like my place is on the front line on this. So how can I be of support? And so another way that I've been helpful is through relationships. And Mary Beth, I know that you've used your relationships as well. So I've used my relationships and connections as ways to bridge people to people that they may or may not know. So it really is, we all have something to offer, and it's about asking the people who are doing the work, what do you need? Or if you see the need, fill the need. You may not even need to ask, just if you see that it's a gap, do it, offer it, and make it happen. So I appreciate the different ways in which we've come to this conversation. I'm noting the time. And wanting to say we've got to close, even though I know I could hear from you all giving more examples and personal experiences around this work. Mary Beth talked about the action plan. And so we have this action plan that we have out there that we've been promoting since June for folks, and we put it in the chat. But I can bring it up again just so that people can see it. I think it's, you won't get anything done if you're not intentional and you map out like where is the work, and you don't ask yourself that question. So this is what it looks like. And it's how do we act? And it's really thinking about how do you keep the momentum? And it's about how do you embed change? And so because we had a series of topics that we were focused on, we did this particular work plan based on those different bands of what do I need to learn? How do I leverage my spheres of influence? How do I support others in the work? How do I sustain the work? And how do I keep engaged, which is what we were talking about today? And then how do we take care of ourselves, right? And like, what does that look like? And more, and also not just yourself, how do you take care of others? So that's another thing too, in terms of how can you help? Offering space for people to be able to do self-care, and really, letting people know that, hey, I think you need to take a break. You need to rest. How can I help with this? And really thinking about that. And so this work plan, I think, is really helpful in getting a person grounded and thinking about real specific steps that they can take to think about that momentum and embedding that change. And then, of course, we have a crowdsourcing document that we have out there that is constantly being updated with new resources. In fact, we had a session on Tuesday and we had more information added to it in real time, which was fun to see that document just be alive and thriving. So really appreciate how people have been just adding all kinds of links and videos and podcasts and pictures of books and just really sharing, you know, different spaces and places of where you can learn more about what you don't know or how you grow what you know, and you want to build it higher. And there are 12 pages to this document, people. So I won't keep scrolling through. Just, you know, use the link. Not only use it for yourself, add to it and share it. Good work and good people share good work and good people. And that's what this document is all about. And so I appreciate our panelists today. Thank you so much for your wisdom and for your action and intention in really trying to sustain this work. I really appreciate it. We really are the change, right? We should not be waiting for someone else to come in and make change happen. We are gonna make the change happen. And I really appreciate how each and every one of you are leaning in to do that. So thank you so much. Any final words? Okay, well, with that, good night, be well, and we'll see everyone on the 27th for our next session at 4 p.m. Bye.
Thank you.